started off. Hello, everybody. I'd like to start to make a start. Thank you.
Hello, hello.
So I'd like to
Hello.
thank you for coming along this morning for Dr Angela Espinosa's keynote talk this morning. Just in a slight, just to give you an idea about what's happening in this session, Angela will be speaking for about 40 minutes with 20 minutes Q&A. And then around about 10 o'clock, I'd like to sort of segue gently into a panel discussion, which is continuing from the one that we started last year after Robert Dyson's keynote at Warwick. Just really looking at the question of hard-soft integration, hard OR, soft OR integration. I'll introduce the panel members at 10 o'clock when we start that session. And in a slight change, I was going to introduce Angela this morning, but since Gerald is here, and I wasn't expecting to meet Gerald in this session, I've asked Gerald to do Angela's introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Impromptu introduction here. So I first met Angela in Colombia when the University of Hull and her University of Los Andes at that time had an exchange program, and I was over there. And she was working in the information systems department. And Mike Jackson had told me that there's this wonderful woman who's done this incredible work with, like, changing the Ministry for the Environment with the viable system model, and so we met and we got talking and things, and then a couple of years later, I suddenly found that Mike had recruited her to Hull. So she'd work. Angela's been working in Hull for what, 20 years at
20
least.
20 years,
yeah,
yes.
And is now in an emeritus position. So I'll hand over to her.
Thank you, Gerald. I don't know, is this working? Can you all hear me? Okay, thank you. Right, so what I'm going to talk to you today is about my new book that was thanks to Gerald. Gerald was organizing this book series on system thinking with Routledge, and he invited me to do a book. So I decided to do it. One of the motivations is that after 20 years of teaching the VSM, students many times find challenging reading the original books from Stafford Beer. They are very tough, very, very, very deep, and sometimes people don't have the time. And so I decided to do a book like a textbook for teaching VSM students, and I just used many examples, case studies of consulting projects that I have done with the VSM in Colombia, in England, in Latin America, and other countries, and some of the case studies that I have developed with my PhD students and MSc students. So it's basically, that is the book. So I'm going to just take you a very quick journey through the book. I call it Sustainable Self-Governance in Businesses and Society, the Viable System Model in Action, because my research has focused in the last 20 years in trying to clarify the importance and the usefulness of the VSM theory to explain issues of sustainability and to focus on governance. Yeah. So that's my book. I had the privilege of being a very close friend to Stafford Beer. I did my PhD in Aston University in the late 1980s under Raúl Espejo's supervision. And I had the privilege of meeting Stafford, and he sort of adopted me. I was the only Latin American student around, and we sympathized very much with our passion for Latin America. And he became my mentor. So in most of these projects, he was very close to me, and I was consulting with him every time, and he even came to Colombia to accompany us in some of the projects. So after Stafford, there have been many people in the organizational cybernetics community that have continued developing the VSM. People like Raúl Espejo, Marcus Schwanning, Efrem Malik, Maurice Jones, Elena, Leonard, his partner, José Pérez Ríos in Valladolid, And then a new generation, let's say with me, Martin Pifner, Patrick Hoerstar, Wolfgang Lasso, Mark Lamberts, and the numbers of BSM books keep growing. Yeah. So the interesting thing is that for many, many years, BSM was sort of hidden, not obscure, not many people took the challenge of trying to understand the theory. And recently, in the last, I would say 10, 15 years, there's been a growing interest in the BSM, as the numbers of books and publications show. Yeah. So the book starts with my presentation of the BSM theory. The BSM theory, I start by explaining my idea of complexity management. Yeah. I emphasize, for me, the BSM is a theory that explains relationships and effectiveness of relationships. So when I think about the BSM, I think about the operations, that is where an organization does what it does, implement the purpose, in which people are getting together in agreements on how to do things, how to implement a particular purpose. There is the management, and the management will have to have a clear understanding of his ideas and tools and approaches to management, and it's the rest of the work, including the environment, in which the organization is interacting with the environment and is either taking or not taking social responsibility, either taking care of the environment or not taking care of the environment, or pretending it does. Yeah? So I do consider that I talk about the viable and sustainable organization. It's not that I extend the BSM, it's that I try to clarify some aspects of the BSM that in this moment I think that need to be clarified, because we cannot talk about viability per se. We cannot say that an organization should be viable forever if the interaction between the organization and the environment and people in the local communities or people in the way that they use resources is being detrimental. So couldn't be sustained in the long term. So I talk about this idea of viability and sustainability. And in my idea, a viable and sustainable organization has responsible autonomy, distributed and hierarchical control. I think that's one of the mistakes of the BSM, that some people read the diagram and think that this is another hierarchical model. What it was inspiring the idea of neural networks, and the whole thing is how to distribute control. Yeah. So I explained the idea of managing complexity from the context of coevolution. Yeah. And I think that this is the basis for viability and sustainability. If you can sustain yourself in the long term, you need to co-evolve with the environment, and that needs adaptation. And adaptation is rethinking your own organization, purpose, strategy, processes, design, and so on. I think that we need to shift to an idea of human scale development, in which the well-being of workers and citizens is core. So it's not just development, socioeconomic, not only economic development, like in the neo-liberal model that we've been experimenting worldwide, but shifting a little bit to think about, and also thinking about ecosystems care, thinking about management of the commons, being responsible with the use of resources and waste and all that, and responsible coexisting with communities. And that, of course, will lead us to move from an extractive to a regenerative economy. So the whole idea is, how can we move a little bit these ideas into that realm? I also make a lot of emphasis in learning. For me, managing complexity has a lot to do with organizational learning. Yeah? As we revisit the law of requisite variety from Ashby, and we think about the interactions between people, we know that there is enormous differential of variety between the management and the operations, and between operations and the environment. And the way that I put it is, like the way that we develop variety is by learning. And in organizations, we are learning as teams, in different kinds of teams. So I make a lot of emphasis in understanding the management of variety from a learning perspective. Because the BSM is a recursive model of management, then the same patterns of interactions, what Stafford defined like system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, recur at different levels of organization. So you can use the same model to refer to organizations at different levels, starting from working operational teams up to the organization as a whole, up to the meta-organization this organization belongs, and to the network of organizations that relates with. In each case, the basic principles of the BSM are responsible autonomy, clear and transparent rules of the game, distributed information, redundancy or potential command, collective consciousness. Those are things that should happen when we have an organization that is decentralized, that has distributed governance, that people are operating in a responsible way, using their autonomy in a responsible way, and that should result in what I call recursive self-governance. I do a lot of emphasis also in the interactions in not only the systems 1, 2, 3, 4, but Stafford explained very well for those of us who have read deeply his theory, that the whole idea is how systems 1, 2, 3 interact together, how the systems 1 interact with the environment, how systems 3, 4, 5 interact together, yeah? So I made, let's say, more clear the emphasis of all this understanding, not only mapping the roles like I'm a system 1, I'm a system 2, I'm a system 2 and a system 3, I am a system 3 and sometimes system 4. That is the basic learning that students will take from the VSM, but it's also going a little bit further in understanding that it is the way that these different types of systems interacts that products that results either in let's say good relationships, no, harmonic relationships in which conflict is not the thing that are leading relations, but is being able to work together and to address any differences of opinion or ideas. So the idea of sustainable self-governance is the meta-purpose should be self-governance for social, ecological, and economic purposes. I understand the idea, the VSM, as a meta-language that help us to agree on recursive models of organization, democratic decision-making spaces, monitoring essential variables for sustainability. This is another emphasis in the book because Stafford said if you want to if you manage to focus the attention of the management in those aspects that are essential for viability, then it's like the 2080 law in which you can really get a lot of improvements in performance by focusing, making sure that at least you are addressing the essential aspects. I add the idea of sustainability because it's not only for the financial viability of the organization, but for the sustainability in the long term, which means doing the things that they are doing without disrespecting the rights of the next generations to do the same. Yeah? So monitoring these essential variables and closing learning loops in the sense that when there are issues that are happening, have the possibility of observing, reflecting, and acting about the performance indicators. Identity, policy, and strategy, and hopefully a deep and diffuse democracy. So those are the first two chapters in which I explain the idea of variety, I explain the VSM with this perspective, and I provide the definitions of system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I explain all the concepts, basic concepts of governance. Then in chapter 3, I present what I call the self-transformation methodology. This is the methodology that I developed in my doctoral thesis in Aston University under Raúl Espejo's supervision, very much inspired in Stafford Beer theory and Raúl Espejo's by plan. In those days, I was doing my PhD on strategic information management, and my methodology was focusing on introducing the aspects of strategic information management in the VSM, by plan, basically. Over the last 20 years, I shift towards sustainability and governance, so the new version of the methodology has both a little bit of emphasis in strategic information management still, but mostly the idea of understanding the VSM to be able to facilitate a learning process in an organization to reflect about their performance, their capability of self-governance. Yeah? So the way that I use it normally is in action research. I do use the VSM as a theory to manage organizational complexity. I understand that complex organization can be explored and mapped using the VSM. We have developed a work with Mike Yearwood and David Lowe that is published in the European Journal of Operational Research called the Constitutive Rules of the VSM. Following Checkland's example, we decided to put together our heads and decide what are the basic things that we could say that any VSM practitioner should be using to have a proper, complete application of the VSM. So we came up with these constitutive rules. And I consider that what I call the self-transformation methodology is a useful epistemology to put into practice these constitutive rules. And the idea I practice the VSM is, I consider the VSM inquiry is never ending. Yeah? With the VSM, I normally teach the VSM as a consultant. I introduce the idea to the business managers, operational people, and so on. And then I expect them to be able to be highly engaged in the process of VSM mapping, diagnosis, and recommendations. But this is a learning process, and it's a learning process that will never end. Yeah? My experience is that people that learn the VSM get so excited because it's such a deep and rich and exciting theory that many people will continue the learning the rest of their life. It's a model that stays with you. Yeah? And the more you use it in an organization, the deeper you go in understanding the organization, and the most engaged is the people about understanding the complexity in organization. The methodology is like that. I have recently also introduced a stage working with Gerald of boundary critique, because I realized that BSM obviously has limitations, like all the methodologies, it's just one model, no? But I realized that, especially in the initial part, dealing with the stakeholders, understanding perspectives, and so on, and understanding the context where the organization is placed is important, and it's better to have it explicit. So in some interventions, I've used boundary critique to start. Then I used agreements on identity, in which I basically, it's very important to put everybody together in terms of what this organization does, because organizations many times are confused between what they wish to do, their vision, their mission, and what they achieve to do in practical terms. So clarifying this distinction between identity in use and spouse identity is very important if we're going to map the organization, because the way organization is organized, people, processes and things are organized depends on this spouse view, on the theory in use rather than the spouse theory. So in this part of the methodology, I facilitate a workshop with people to try to clarify what this organization really does. And of course, what it will desire to do. You know? And then there is a stage of mapping levels of recursion, in which we basically clarify what are the different kind of subsidiary organizations embedded within the organization, and we only focus in that moment in those parts, those operational units that are directly implementing the organizational purpose. So we make a very clear distinction between what Stafford called metasystemic activities, that are all of those that are not operational, that are not productive units. Whatever we are producing services or products, it doesn't matter, but those that are producing the services, and those that are servicing the productive units. Yeah? For Stafford Beer, metasystemic units are those that are providing the knowledge, the information, the finances, the technology to allow the productive units to be excellent in what they do. No? It's just investing the idea of management. It's not management as leading everybody and deciding on behalf of the operations, but it's management as servicing, providing the richest possible context for operational units to self-organize and self-govern. So we do this recursive analysis that is fundamental for the VSM in the stage 3, and then we do a preliminary diagnosis in which we start mapping the organization and introducing all these distinctions, systems 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and relationships in the people, and asking people through workshops basically to identify the roles and to map the roles with DSM language. And then to start in this process, we start understanding some of the typical pathologies that the VSM allows us to discover. And then we do a full VSM diagnosis that is the most important and the most extensive and detailed aspect. And we do it stage by stage in different parts of the organization, if we are focusing in one bit or if we are focusing in several bits of the organization. And we then produce what I call self-transformation projects. Because all this is done through workshops, through interactions with people, then it is the people who decide what are possible solutions to the problems that we have identified according to their own expertise of the organization and knowledge of their skills and possibilities. These are the constitutive rules of the organization that I mentioned before, are published in this paper with David Mike, and these are just examples of the kind of tools that I use in each one of the stages of the methodology. In the organizational identity, as I said before, we do boundary critique. Then we do a little bit of, I borrow from Checkland the cartoons. I found Checkland's cartoons very, very useful to clarify, let's say, the different perspectives and the tensions, no, that are around people, but I use them to focus on organizational problems, not broadly in the problems that the organization is facing, but the problems that the current organization is bringing to their performance. Yeah, so I use cartoons in that sense. And then I borrow from Raúl Espejo. He basically borrowed from Checkland the Catoe to produce a statement of identity, and he called it TASCOI. That is basically the same idea of how to produce a statement of identity, of organizational identity. And I also suggest to use sometimes Gerald's ideas of BATOE, that is more including the perspectives of the affected and the beneficiaries in this statement of identity. But the idea is to facilitate with a particular, let's say, language and tools, the people to come up with a statement of identity. Through the book, I used to explain the methodology, an example from a recent consultancy in a school in Romania. One of my MBA students in Hull University took the VSM, did a brilliant work in his thesis about this, and asked me to go and facilitate a one-year consultancy coaching to the organization on the VSM. So I used the cartoons, I mean all the examples of the different stages we did in ELF to explain the methodology. In the next stage is the recursive analysis. That's the way that we produce models of recursive analysis. In this case, we have ELF, the kindergarten, the schools, and then the subgroups of kindergartens and schools, and so on. And then we do the system in focus, that is where we decide to focus the analysis of viability, either at the level of the school as a whole or in the independent groups. In this project, for instance, we did the whole school first, and then we did all the kindergartens, and then we did all the schools. So we went stage by stage with representatives from parents, teachers, students, administrators. So very important in the methodology, the involvement and the selection of who will be part of this exercise. We do interviews, we do surveys, BSM surveys, and we do workshops. Yeah, and choosing the people is absolutely fundamental. Then in the workshops, we ask people, this is a real flip chart that we used in one workshop in Romania, where I basically facilitate, and we started sort of mapping some of and color coding some of the issues that were arising with the students, with the teachers and the administrators, about issues that were absolutely clear that were not working very well, issues that needed to be addressed during the whole process. And then we start doing the VSM diagnosis. The full diagnosis takes normally a lot of time, and again we use interviews, we use surveys, we do workshops, and slowly we start getting to understand and ask people to contribute to understanding the main pathological issues that we found in the current way of getting organized. And then we do a stage that is monitoring performance, in which basically we review the key performance indicators using what we call an idea of cybernetic soundness of key performance management systems. Stafford Beer in the CyberSyn project in Chile, you may have heard, he created this dream of on real-time performance management systems with KPIs that were anticipating changes in the performance of the indicators, and this has been like the cybernetic dream that remains there. But there are lots of work in clarifying what does it mean in a business. And what we do is review the way that KPIs are defined in a business, review their performance management systems, and see what kind of improvements can be brought forward by inspiring in cybernetic ideas of performance management. That is basically, I mean, Stafford was one of the pioneers of the idea of agile management. Everything that is talk about agile now is in the VSM theory originally. Yeah. So we review the existing performance management systems, suggest the improvements, and then we go in the process of asking the people to implement this, to decide what are these self-transformation projects find natural leaders that can be leading these projects, and then we help them to define the scope, the purpose, the project leaders, establish timelines, decide what resources they need, and so on. So that's the final stage of the methodology. So after that, the rest of the book just go through different kinds of applications. Chapter 4 is focused on health. This book was written mostly during the COVID. I was very impressed by the way that the COVID transformed ourselves, our individuals, our families, the businesses, and everything. So I start with a reflection about the COVID-19 and the way that it affected our interaction with the environment as individuals. No, the kind of things, the X are the kind of things that we stopped doing. We couldn't go to the pub, we couldn't travel, we couldn't go to the movies, we couldn't, no, and the many questions that emerge about our interactions. Then I realized that one of the things that happened in the COVID that I found interesting was that we had to focus in what I call the essential variables for viability and sustainability. Yeah, in that moment, we obviously we needed home, food, no, some financial stability, and we needed to find out ways to compensate for the lack of social relationships, the lack of entertainment, the lack of traveling, and so on. So again, have a much more simpler life. No, so for me that was very interesting, and I make a reflection from a VSM perspective. I do a VSM of an individual. That was something that Elena Leonard started doing, and Mark Johnson, and I tried to do that in the context of the COVID as starting the business. Then I present a case study I did with a PhD student of mine from Colombia, Andrea Martinez. She did her VSM project in Mexico, in a cleaning industry in Mexico, and it was a very beautiful project because she managed to create a very clear focus on KPIs for sustainability, and she managed to engage people in this cleaning industry to observe the key sustainable indicators and to measure them in real time and to observe their behavior over real time. So I found it very interesting, this example, because it had some real implications and real changes in this corporation. So I present that example. I present an example of this was sorry that this diagram got collapsed, got wrong in this presentation, but we have, this was a project that we did actually with Gerald in a trust. Well, this was when another master student, he was a surgical doctor, cancer surgical doctor in a trust in Hull. And he did also, we did also a 4 months consulting project with him. He already knew the VSM, and he managed to get involved all the people in his unit, about 50 people in the VSM process. It was a really interesting process. We managed to identify lots of issues that were very relevant for them. When we finished the process, the trust director was very well impressed with the process, and he sort of said, okay, you have green light, go and implement it. At the same time, we were doing another big VSM project. We call it the little project and the big project with Gerald and Maya Vascoa and John Walker, my husband. And we were doing, analyzing the same trust during the COVID, and we were analyzing the command structure that they put into place to deal with the COVID. And we were analyzing it with a VSM perspective, and we came up with recommendations on how to deal better with a crisis in this trust using VSM criteria of effectiveness. That project, let's say, we can say that it was so effective because, well, mostly because the COVID improved, and that was to prepare them for the third wave that never happened. So the project didn't get implemented fully, but the learning was really, really exciting and very, very beautiful. So then chapter 5, I go into education, and I present several case studies in education. I start by explaining my idea of systemic education. This is a topic I've been very, very keen for many years, and then I explain here what in my mind means to do systemic education. And then I make a summary of the ELF project, going into all the details and reflecting, and provide, in each one of the case studies, I provide testimonies from the people of the business in which they explain why they found the relevance of this. There's a project about designing an online systemic education platform with a student of mine in Colombia that was also very beautiful, and a project about a Colombian university that is putting fully into practice the viability and sustainability approach, and they are leaders of sustainability in the region, and they have done an amazingly beautiful work in Santa Marta, protecting the local indigenous communities and protecting the local ecosystems. Chapter 6 is about organizational networks. I have been doing this research with several PhD students in the last years, and it's trying to understand viability not only of one organization, but of a network of organizations. And the idea is that if we have a network that is a long-time network, we could create a metasystemic management for the network using BSM criteria. So I present one example is in Mexico again, is the cleaner production network in Mexico, about 100 businesses that were working in a cleaner production network, and we use the BSM to understand the better way to get organized. Another example is another PhD student of mine, Alfadal Al-Hinai, who helped to design the broadband Omani company, the Omani broadband company, using the BSM and using social network analysis. This is for me a very exciting research project, trying to understand the similarities between BSM complex adaptive systems and how social network analysis can be combined with BSM. So we present this case study. And another that was a consulting project in Latin America is the equivalent of Renata is the equivalent of Janet, the National Broadband Network for Research and Institutions, and we did a BSM of the Colombian Renata. And then in chapter 7, I present the application of BSM in communities. This is another of my research passions, try to see how an organization as complex as a community can use the BSM to map their own organization and to understand better ways to map it. I present 2 new case studies did in Colombia. One was in the Amazon jungle. This was with a community of indigenous called in the Pirá-Paraná River, the Jaguares del Yurupari, they are called, very remote part of Colombia. So we did the cartoons with them. We did a recursive analysis understanding all the community activities that are basic for their viability and sustainability, and how they are organized about these community activities like food production, fishing, education, housing, and so on. And we came up with some BSM analysis, and it was a fantastic experiment, and it was a very, very deep learning in terms of the power of the BSM to understand issues of governance. And a similar one later was with Carlos Duran, another student in Colombia. This was in a Black community in the Rosario Island, in the Colombian Caribbean islands, and they are one of the most beautiful ecosystems in the country, marine ecosystems, and this community have been caring for these ecosystems and basically devoted to sustainable tourism. We did as well BSM analysis. And the last chapter is thinking about national applications of the BSM. I talk about my work in the 1990s in Colombia, where I used the BSM first to map the information management in the Colombian President's office that I was directing in those days, the informatics secretariat, to explain how do we use the BSM to design the monitoring system to assess the impact of programs to fight poverty at the national level for 4 years. Really, that in my opinion, was the best project we did in Colombia in those years. And then re-engineering the National Auditing Office, a project that I did that Raúl Espejo and even Stafford Beer, even Von Förster came to help us in this project. And was a 4-year project in which we redesigned, re-engineered the whole auditing office, trained like 600 engineers, and did BSM in about 60 national public organizations in Colombia. And finally, the National Environmental System, again a 4-year project in which we mapped the whole environmental system of the country, like strategic ecoregions. We used the BSM to map the way of managing these strategic ecoregions, and that was a very big inspiration for me for the work I've done in the last 20 years. And another big project to redesign the national school system using the BSM. It was a 2-year project. We only came to the design stage of the project and was aborted for political reasons. And then I present the final, this story about BSM at the NHS. and come up with the conclusion that there is a lot of learning, because as a recursive level, you really can identify several governance challenges at different levels. When you talk in a unit, in the breast cancer unit, in a trust, at the regional level, at the national level, you start seeing some recurrence patterns, issues, pathological issues of governance, and that's what I try to highlight here and come up with the idea that BSM could be very useful to facilitate systemic change. Yeah. Like distributing specialized knowledge, bottom-up innovations, promoting self-governance, and in this case, seeing pathologies like this schizophrenia between clinical and managerial criteria in the BSM, in the NHS. So the conclusion is, well, it seems to be that the BSM is more relevant than ever. No, we have seen the possibilities that it offers for different kinds of organizations, and definitely the self-transformation methodology can be enhanced by creative use, combining it with other soft OR approaches, yeah, and even hard OR approaches. That is what we are going to be discussing in the panel. I have been leading the Meta Forum, that is an organization that promotes Stafford Beer's legacy. We are doing a webinar series because September the 11th was the 50 years of the CyberSync project. So if anyone is interested, we have a series of webinars, yeah, that start on September the 25, reviewing the podcast from Evgeny Morozov that did about the CyberSync project in Chile. I'll leave the PDF with Mike in case anyone wants the presentation. All the links are there. And as Stafford would say, after only 50 years, the time for the BSM seems to have come. So anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
So Angela, thank you very much for that talk. We've got plenty of time for questions right in at the back there.
Hi, thanks for this, and I very much enjoyed that, and also I just finished a dissertation on the BSM, and your work was very helpful in framing that. I had a question about ethos.
Yes.
Because something that I've been struggling with is whether we just have the ethos we have, and as long as it's consistent and you get a viable system out of it, there's just no questioning what that is. Or whether there's this, just as BSM inquiry is ongoing, kind of ethical inquiry is ongoing, and there's this sense that we might question what the ethos is, rather than just have a system that serves it.
Oh yes, definitely you have to question what the ethos is, because the ethos is something that is changing, is evolving, no? And the ethos is not normally fairly distributed between everyone. Many times organizations contract a consultant to define the ethos, and then the people that even know, or people know in paper, but the decisions they are taking in the day-to-day life are not inspired by that ethos. They have embedded this ethos in their behavior. So the distance between the ethos as stated and the ethos that each individual is using there is always a distance. So that's why this needs to be used in as a continuous learning process, in which, I mean, what the BSM workshops does, in my experience, is to surface these issues and to allow the possibility of having these discussions in depth. Because many times organizations say, oh, ethos checked, strategy checked, no? And then because there is a document, they say, we've done it, it's done. And in the reality, people continue taking decisions with very disparate mindsets. So this definitely is something, policy is an emerging property. It's not something in BSM, in my understanding of BSM, is not something that is imposed top-down. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
You mentioned that you can map issues into the BSM language. So the one thing I think about is the language people use to express them. With your Christian community, do they understand the BSM models you've created, or is that your benefit as researchers to understand the situation, or do they also get some benefit from this kind of, they have to learn essentially French to understand what's going on?
Oh, definitely, I think that the benefit is enormous for people to understand. And I have a different position from other BSM consultants. Most of my colleagues, BSM consultants, who are very famous, very rich, and do big corporations that I don't, they will try to hide the language. avoid using the language because they don't want to scare the customers. Yeah, I am of the very different position. I do think that people, when they understand the meaning of these BSM distinctions, or language as I call it, they enrich their own capability of having a perception of their own organization that is more structured and is more clear and is deeper. Yeah? So I think that the main learning for my customers as a consultant is that they learned this language, and many of them, when they manage to get it, they have it for the rest of their life. It's very useful for them to understand their own organizations and for them to repeat the process. Because you can have one consultant with the BSM and say, oh yes, bravo, bravo, great, no? And then you are gone and things come back to normal. Nothing happened. Yeah. So in my experience is when people have learned some of the basic ideas. I mean, you don't even need to use the language if you don't want, but the criteria, the meta language, the idea, the criteria of performance and effectiveness that the BSM inspire is what you need to live in with people, because this is what is going to help them to review, to continue the learning. Otherwise, they will have an isolated learning process that may have been excellent, and then they will forget. Yeah, so that's the way that I try to do it, and it's challenging. It's challenging. Some people just don't like it or feel scared of it, but when they do it, they really enjoy. They really enjoy it.
Gerald.
Yes, it's more of a comment than a question. But so I met our dean the other day, and he said to me that he knows the judge who's leading the COVID inquiry, and he's trying to arrange for us to get evidence for the COVID inquiry. And it sounds like you've done some further work at the national level, which you'll have to bring that if we get that opportunity.
No, I haven't. No.
Okay.
This is theory. This is just no. I mean, I haven't got a NHS consultancy. No, I have done work with my students in Exeter from the NHS. I have supervised students who are using the NHS, and really interesting work. So other bits of the NHS that have been mapped and analyzed with BSM. Yes. No, I haven't done the national level. I wish I could. I think that would be really, really, really important to do. Yes, I'm just suggesting let's do it, but nobody's noticing me yet.
Well, good luck with that. The question here.
Building on the gentleman's comments earlier, and also the 50 years in BSM. My research is exploring barriers to people using systems thinking, and BSM is one of the things that has quite a few barriers possibly. In fact, how would you say that people can make BSM or systems thinking, but BSM is absolutely your speciality, accessible to people without the need for a consultant?
Well, that's a very, very good question, and I am grateful you do it. I don't have one unique answer, but my whole life has been spent in trying to find an answer to your question, because I do believe that the BSM is a very rich theory. No, my book is my first answer. I mean, I tried to write the book in a way that is readable for people that don't have a master or a PhD, or I mean, people that can grasp the ideas as much as possible. In Metaforum, one of our aspirations is to put the BSM and Stafford's work in the commons domain. So we are trying to produce and upload all the content that we can access. We are doing these webinars, we are doing conferences, and we are trying to produce even BSM. We are now moving into BSM coaching courses, in which we want to certify people from all sorts of levels to be able to grasp things. And many of us are working, and some people are doing amazingly nice work in terms of talking about the BSM for the common people, yeah, doing the dummies thing of the BSM. So we are working on that. I cannot say that there is one answer, but many of us in the community are aware of that limitation and are trying to work on that.
I've actually got an answer to that question.
Oh, great, please.
And it happened at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and it was a colleague of mine at the University of Exeter. So this is free intellectual property. In order to scale up a design class, so this was a design thinking class, they decided to use the Mural platform to design an exercise that would scale to a class of about 700 students without the supervisor having to supervise or facilitate any group work. So basically they designed a particular design methodology that they wanted the students to use, and then they self-scaffolded the methodology in the platform itself. So if you like, you started at the top left-hand corner of the mural and it told you what to do as a group, and the platform itself navigated you through the methodology as well as doing the methodology. So if you like, the platform told you what to do.
And just to come back to that, I'd love to see methodology and talk to you about that, because I think that's really interesting. Where my research is coming from is, say I'm a small business, small medium enterprise, and Angela, the back of your book, and you says that it's small business. You don't know systems thinking exists, you don't know VSM exists, you probably had a bad time academically at school, so you haven't got the students, you probably haven't got the confidence to engage with the university over a knowledge exchange partnership.
Yeah.
How do we, so, you know, if you look at systems dynamics, you possibly could argue Senge in the fifth discipline brought it to common knowledge, and I'm not saying that a book. How do we get VSM? Because I agree that it can be very powerful, and systems thinking can be very powerful. But actually, when you start looking at the barriers, so you look at holding workshops, but if you're a relatively small organisation, that's got a cost, and you can't necessarily afford the cost of bringing 10 people together for something untried, and that's where I'm trying to get an understanding from. And you do start to address it in your book, which is really good.
Yeah, so I can have a further conversation about how to deal with that problem too. But again, the platform figures, because, you know, again, you don't actually need people in the room at the same time. Yeah?
But you need to know about how to use the platform.
It should be as easy to use as using Facebook, and everybody can use Facebook. Yeah, so I think, you know, that's the direction of travel. Sorry, back to Angela. I mean, otherwise I'll give you a lecture about how to do it. Any other questions at all? Yeah, at the back again.
So, you mentioned finding natural leaders as part of the transformative change thing. And that's something I've been thinking about a bit in terms of, it seems, you know, so we've got this nice structure that VSM gives us, but if we actually want to change things, just knowing what the structure ought to be isn't enough. We actually require quite a lot of luck in terms of there being leaders, and of course the organisation may well have a history, and I've encountered organisations where the history is of failed attempts at change, and so no one wants to try. And so I was wondering if you could sort of say something about how you identify what a natural leader looks like, when you think that this is the right moment to try and change.
Two answers to your question. One thing that I didn't mention, but in my experience is one of the main learnings. All the beautiful, nice, successful projects that I've done in the VSM have one characteristic, that the leader, there was some leaders in the organization that were aware of system thinking or VSM, and they were keen to experiment. Yeah, so that has always critical success factor number one. If you come without that in place and you start from the bottom, just your own VSM project, and then you try to go to convince people about that, is less likely that it's going to be succeeding. Yeah? So that's one part. The other part about the natural leaders to lead the projects. Yeah? In the workshops, you always noticed that there is a few people that are the ones that understand, that has it, and they are normally the ones that are more participative, the ones that are more excited, the ones that come with better ideas, and normally there are people, you notice that there are people that other people recognize and respect. Yeah, that's what I call natural leaders, because it's normally those people that when you say, okay, who would like to implement this idea? Me, and they are there and they have the respect of the others. So those natural leaders are much better people to lead the projects, independent of if they do have the power in the structure to be appointed as the project leaders. But normally these kind of people that have understood the theory, that are sympathetic, that can become coaches to other people to repeat the experiment, are the ones that I will appoint as that I will request to lead these self-transformation projects. Yeah.
Any other questions at all? Yes, okay.
One more comment on building these things, because what's coming out is when I'm consulting, quite often I go in a situation where you can't teach them a new thing or get them involved. Now, one of the things around natural reading, also natural processes, because they must already have some kind of natural reading process, some kind of thing they must get together in some way to have discussion of some kind. And it's again whether really consultants who talk about the high DSM are doing that intentionally because that's the only way to get started without intimidating people in that situation. And so there's a natural progression of capability as they get more interested and want to learn about it. But initially, to intervene, you need to engage the natural processes, natural language of the organisation.
And it's about, sorry,
No, Corinne.
So what I'm finding is you need an entry point into systems thinking, whether that's implicit, explicit, transparent, hidden, is a completely different thing. So if you actually, one of the things I've done recently, as part of my research, is I've gone through the VSM, but at no point have I used VSM. Somebody's come, I've got a problem. We solved the problem using VSM, which is brilliant. And now they're starting to take an interest in, well, how have you done that? If I'd have gone to them at the beginning, you would have to do this and that. So instead, as you just said, we had several telephone Zoom calls where it was just asking questions for maybe 5 minutes as part of a bigger management conversation where for 5 minutes I go, oh, what about this? Or how do you talk to each other about this? Trying to understand the terms and things like that. And that's worked. So they use the VSM without knowing it. But if you'd have gone to them at day one and gone, they wouldn't have known to even ask, is there a methodology or an approach or a tool we can use? And it's about, from what I can see, finding ways to make an entry point into our field that's accessible to people that don't know our language or haven't got the confidence within academia.
Yeah, definitely. I think that many times, I mean, there are different ways of points of entry, but for instance, my students in Exeter, not all of them have the support of a leader. Some of them have to do a little bit of VSM experimentation, and then when they have something to show, they can start a conversation with their bosses or the next levels and generate support. So, I mean, it depends a lot in the way that the project starts, no?
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about non-codified behaviours in organisations, because I think that's the direction of travel. But if you have a look at Checkland's work and the constitutive rules for SSM, I mean, that's how I got started. I was in an organisation, Rolls-Royce actually, in 2012, and they were going through a process. And I looked at it, I said, well, you're actually doing soft systems methodology, sort of. I could see all of the steps and the way in which they brought people together in a workshop. No mention of soft systems methodology, but it was clearly a problem structuring approach. It was there.
Where some of the stuff comes from that I'm finding is that somewhere like Rolls-Royce has got the ability to bring in or know that there's people they can go to. They've got confidence.
They were doing it themselves internally.
Yeah, but in terms of being able to have time and effort and resources to do it, if you're somebody that runs, I don't know, 5 McDonald's franchises in the Birmingham area, and you've got a problem, you probably have no idea even when to Yes, and there is a whole round.
While we're here,
yeah. Let's have that conversation separately. Are there any more questions at all for Angela? We're getting. Please.
You were talking about the NHS.
Yes.
I apologise for coming in late. But have you come across Beer's work on health systems?
On what?
Saf Beer did some work on health systems.
Oh yes, of course, yes.
So we've got it in the Liverpool John Moores collection.
Yes.
And he made a big map of iatrogenic conditions, and was actually talking about perhaps using some of the things that you use to develop VSMs, some of the icons, and actually using them for different types of systems maps, which I thought was a really interesting idea.
Yes.
And he didn't have a chance to take it any further. I think they tried to get a PhD from it, it just didn't work out.
Yeah.
But it would be lovely to try to move that cybernetic work forward a bit, especially when you have systems that really are biopsy.
Yes.
So try to help people to understand what's going on with the reduction of variability.
Yes.
It's definitely what we're doing when we start modelling. I did Houston's design analytics, and each one of those little analytics models is basically helping people to give insight into their processes.
Yes.
So in a way, if we could develop a language around cybernetics as a whole.
Yes.
And then that gives us an inroad into doing something like the VSM. But actually that's cybernetic. I mean, the language that he's used was very rarefied. And we do it a better way.
Oh yeah,
I think
definitely.
it would be a team effort. It would have to be
Yes, yes. Definitely. I mean, the two things, both the language, how to put the language. My husband has been having a project that is a cartoon guide to cybernetics. Yeah, and I mean, he hasn't progressed enough. But you know, these cartoon guides to science and biology and like that kind of idea. And I think that we really need to do something about that. Definitely. And the other thing that we need to do, and I haven't yet found in the community someone to take the lead in that, is to update the VSM theory with the newest research in neurophysiology, because there is so much dramatic change that it will be really nice to have a new version of the VSM with new neurophysiology and neurocognition theories. And I think that it will be really fascinating research project, but I still haven't been able to identify, to find someone to say, okay, I'm going to lead this, or it will need a team, no?
Yes. So on that, I mean, the team that I'm collaborating with in Birmingham, they're all interested in that neuroscience.
Yeah.
So really, if you want to collaborate on a bit of funding to get maybe researchers to work on that.
Yes, I would love to do that. Yes, I may have a few people that are going in that direction in the community, and one of them is a Dutch guy that is doing a webinar in next year, and he's an expert in DSM and neurocognition. Yeah. So yes, fascinating. I think we are late to go that way. Very important. Yes.
Okay, that's brilliant, and it's nice to finish on a high point of the grant application. So I'd like to thank everybody Angela, first of all, for her presentation, everybody for their questions. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so for the last part of this, thanks, Joe. For the last part of this session, I want to carry on what we started last year at OR64 in Warwick, which was a panel session sort of kicked off by Robert Dyson's keynote address. And it was basically looking at the question of hard-soft integration. So we're kind of aware of the fact that there's a community of practice and of academic scholarship in the area of soft OR and problem structuring methods, but it's quite distinctive and seemingly quite separate from the rest of the conference that's taking place around us, notwithstanding the system stream. And therefore, what I've done is, Chris has actually done, it was Chris's who kind of pulled this together, invited a small panel to join with Angela and also give a very quick, maybe no more than a minute, sort of position statement on this question of hard-soft integration. And I'd like to invite Eleanor Reynolds from the University of Warwick, who's just completed, 2 years ago completed her PhD in a very big ethnographic study of Severn Trent Water on everyday problem structuring behaviours in an organisation, and also David Lane from Henley Business School, long and distinguished career in the area of system dynamics and the use of system dynamics as a problem structuring method. And Colin, do you think you'll be able to join us as well? I'm kind of co-opting you at very short notice. Obviously from SODA, journey making, strategy finder, and a long history in this field. So could I invite the panelists to sort of come and join us sort of at the front here? And I think Eleanor and David, you've got something pre-prepared. You can sort of, or maybe respond to Angela's talk. Yeah, just to get us going, and then I'd like to see if we can get some discussion going on this point.
I am Kaiser Soze. Angela, take a seat.
Thank you.
So, Eleanor, do you want to start, or would you like that?
Sure, I can come if you would like me to. So, as Mike
think that we need to share this.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that better? Yeah, perhaps a little. So thank you, Mike. That was a good introduction. I did an ethnographic study for my PhD. I was looking at how people structure problems when OR practitioners are not there. And the answer is that yes, they do structure problems, and you can discern when they're using what we would recognise as hard techniques and soft techniques, perhaps not quite the tools and methods we might expect to see, but they really are definitely doing some hard OR and some soft OR. I also noticed at the periphery of my research that it really mattered which groups were considering the situation. So as Angela mentioned, when we run a PSM intervention, we think very carefully about who we manage to involve in our workshops. We sort of curate our group of participants quite carefully. It was interesting for me that it was very evident that you had different perceptions of the situation depending on which group were involved in discussions, and often that those perceptions change through time. So another thing I'm interested in is whether we're looking at specific time-bound interventions or an ongoing cyclical involvement with a messy, wicked, swampy problem situation that people have a desire to improve. I think that's it from me.
Thank you.
I hope that wasn't too long.
David.
I'd like to go next.
I looked at it from an institutional point of view, picking up on what Robert was saying and doing, and I was thinking, what are the factors that we need to confront here? And it seems to me that there are two kind of intertwined ones. First of all, there's just the intellectual side. Large areas of this field just attract people who like maths, who like being left alone with their computer, who like tinkering with this stuff, and that it just does. I think this is an odd and rather wonderful group of people because we've got people who are more interested in organisational psychology, sociological effects, organisation effects. But we just need to be aware there's just this intellectual side to the field, but also reinforced by and reinforcing is the performance measurement side for this field, and this, I'm afraid, gets us down to journals and publications. This is an academic problem, and I speak as someone who's on the CAB's Academic Journal Guide scientific panel, where we have these arguments. But if we're measured a certain way, we're going to do certain things, and I think those two sides we need to engage with. But both of this sounds negative. I think this is very different from when I joined the OR community, which I guess would be about 30 years ago. There's now a lot more space.
Is there?
For PSMs, for soft OR, and I've just been surfing on that, and it's because it's magnificent work from people like him, and largely him, but a few others have made that space for us. Yeah.
Well, Colin, would you like to
take a comment?
I think many people in this room will know that I found this distinction between hard and soft immensely distressing over the years. Somebody's always doing the problem structuring. The issue is, who do you let do it? And a lot of the problem structuring methods were developed to get more involvement from the people who actually will have to act at the end of the day. And that's the issue we're addressing all the time. I don't see anything other than a continuum between soft and hard. You move down from initial problem structuring, I hope, with a client group, and one of those comments is absolutely right. It's interesting, in the strategy finder manuals, there is a manual about how to find the appropriate participants to join in the problem structuring process, because it's absolutely critical. Who you get round the table matters. So you move from that, and the number of times we've moved down to really hard OR, but then back again. It's a continuum, but it's an interactive continuum as well. And I really hate this distinction. I think it's done the OR community absolutely no good at all. And what's even worse is that problem structuring methods were defined as if they were just about problem structuring. Quite often you work with a group and they don't want to move on to anything further because they've found an immense level of commitment towards a solution that they think is really powerful because they've done good problem structuring. Why should we stop it at that point? You know, the notion of problem structuring methods are just about problem structuring is a nonsense. Similarly, that they're not about hard OR is a nonsense. We need to integrate that within our own community, for Christ's sake. As a starting point, it doesn't do us any good at all. We need to engage our clients in the work that we do, and engaging means that we need to pay attention to the way in which they structure the problems they want us to address. It's as simple as that. And this distinction, the sort of so-called dichotomy, and David's right, the journals have done us no good in this respect either. The American journals, as you've seen, some of the struggles that, for example, John Mingers has had in trying to get stuff published in US OR journals. And it does as a profession, no good at all. I know Jeff's out there at the back there. I'm sure would have something to say about this topic. But anyway, I've said enough.
Well, that's it. Well, please do.
Telling this critical statement that I've thought about for years ever since then. He said the problem with and he was talking about over-mathematization of management science. And he was saying the problem with management science is not that, actually. The problem with management science, in his view, was that management science didn't take its subject seriously enough. And I thought about that. I thought that was the most damning criticism I've ever heard, because what he meant was that a lot of management scientists, he thought, and I think he was actually particularly thinking in America, not going to be rude about that, we're not actually looking at the problem as a starting point and taking a sort of broadly scientific view about what that was, and take it and letting that go wherever it took them. And that led me on to, I thought, you know, as a practitioner for 30 odd years, I never saw that distinction as remotely helpful. And the archetype I like to tell people, just to crystallise that, is when we were working on NHS Direct, as I don't know right now, NHS 111, that came out of some really soft, fluffy workshops, scenario thinking workshops a couple of years previously, which weren't, you know, we should just, we should think about things a bit more really. And it just so happened that in '97 the new government came in and were looking for the ideas of Wellington Health Service, and they set up various groups, one of which I was on, and they were all talking about, you know, building new hospitals, this, that, and that, and I said, well, hang on. We spent thinking, you know, the future about this, and it's not just that, and hence we started talking about use of modern technology, telephones, etc., and that was what led to NHS Direct. But, and this is the interesting bit, we did all that, and we set NHS Direct up. Within a year, we were doing classical 1960s OR, modelling, simulation modelling, etc., on the call centre design, the number of call centres you need. There is no such thing. I tend to say there's no such thing as hard or soft OR from that perspective. You know, it's just have a problem, it takes you where, and it could take you one way, it could take you another. In that case, it took us across the whole spectrum. I'm just not interested, in a sense, in a very sort of serious sense, in that problem. But I can see it's a problem, but it's not. It shouldn't be a problem from that point of view. A lot of practitioners, I think the same. But you know, what's it all about? We used to get on with what we had to use, whatever seemed appropriate at that time.
Yeah. Well, I think what you point out there, you know, if you like, there is just OR, if you like, dealing with the problem at hand. It's kind of, yeah, it's exactly what Colin is saying here as well. I suppose what David is pointing out, and what I'm acutely aware of myself now as taking over from Robert as co-editor-in-chief of EJOL, is the fact that, you know, what exactly is OR when it's published? You know, and I see it from what finds its way into the academic literature, and an awful lot of what I see published, I'm going to get shot for saying this, is not OR, because there is no problem, there is no client. What there is, you know, a well-known problem, and somebody's got a better algorithm for addressing that problem. it runs faster, or it comes up with a better solution in terms of use of resource, which is the subject of the algorithm. But there is no problem as such. There is no real-world situation, and an awful lot, I think, of what actually ends up within the covers of my journal and other operational research journals is shaved of any context of any problem. It's just the algorithm, which is what Peter Checkland was saying 40 years ago when he was talking about the notion of situational logics. OR got to be good because it eventually realised that here was a scheduling problem, here was a packing problem, here was a cutting problem, a timetabling problem, a frontiering problem, for those of you that are into DEA. And once we know that it's that sort of problem, then we know what sort of algorithm to use to solve that problem, and we can always use better algorithms. And a lot of, at least the academic practice of OR, and perhaps an awful lot of what's published, is that, which is not what Colin was saying is operational research. Now that's, I think, perhaps is that a contested view? Is that confrontational?
I'm going to give you slightly more biography than you probably want here. So I spent 10 years as an academic philosopher and have retrained in the last year and am now here. And it's been really interesting as a kind of outsider coming in to a discipline and seeing so many of the things in my own discipline just reflected, by analogy. So in philosophy, we've got exactly the hard-soft distinction. I had a colleague who thought there were two types of philosophy, moral philosophy and technical philosophy, and I'm like, you just missed out the stuff I do in the middle. And you've got the, applied versus pure thing. Philosophy is exactly opposite here, in the applied stuff, that's starting to sound not really like it's philosophy. We just do the game theory or the decision theory, that's proper philosophy, and then actually doing real life problems, that's for someone else. Like, I feel like you guys should get together with philosophers and just tag team on some of this stuff.
Presumably that weeping sound we can hear is Socrates. Respond to that.
But there is this huge realization in philosophy at the moment that this ought to be applied to real life more, because the ancient Greeks were all about that, and it was kind of David Hume in the 18th century that moved away with that, more or less at the same time that Adam Smith, his mate, was inventing economics. I think there's room for a broad church here, right? That you say, look, OR encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses whatever we want it to encompass, because disciplinary boundaries are just whatever we say they are. But the idea that it's meant to be in service at some point to real-life problems we can make a difference for. So actually doing something like the viable systems model on the discipline itself. What are the links between the hard and the soft? Are they in fact working? This is an ongoing inquiry which will last forever. I think that's the approach that we ought to take, but that's partially just because I've been indoctrinated now and I've drunk the Kool.
Elena, go on. Angela, go on.
Okay. I particularly have always been very upset about this internal fights in operational research. Colin, I didn't know you before. I'm very pleased you are here, but you were my inspiration when I was doing my PhD, because I had enormous admiration for understanding the idea of common sense as an engineer. I am a computer and systems engineer. I came from, I was sort of teaching operational research. I was teaching how to design an operating system, and I was into hard technology. And I found one problem that for me was too important, one frustration as a computer and systems analyst, to go to a business after having designed a software and to realize 6 months later that nobody was using the software after an enormous amount of work. And I came to do my PhD trying to understand why is it that computer systems engineers have such a frustrating life? What is the gap And then I found the VSM. And I focus on trying to understand computer-human interactions. No? And I think that operational research has this wonderful variety of tools and approaches that goes from the very, very structured things that we can convert into, automatize into business processes and computers and so on, and the bit in which we are interacting with the people that are going to use or not use these computers, and it is the people and the way that they are organized that will determine if the solutions are good enough. So I think that the operational research has this fantastic variety of tools to go through all the spectrums, for understanding the human aspects, to understanding the social organizational aspects, to understanding the technological efficiency process aspects, and I feel very frustrated of all these fights, internal fights, and discrediting between, oh no, you are no one because you are a software person, no, oh, you are old-fashioned because you are BSM, no, you haven't understood because you are not into artificial intelligence or whatever. I think that instead of helping us, no, these internal wars between all the different disciplines and continuous criticisms haven't been good for us, because by the end all of us are the ones that are not being able to have the impact that we should be having. So I really think that the integration between OR disciplines is very important. And the respect and the understanding of the boundaries and the limits. We should be just working together, not criticizing everyone and say, no, you didn't understand this paradigm or this philosopher or whatever. No, we all come from different perspectives. We all complement each other, and we should be much more working together, because that's what we are. That's the best way of having impact.
Eleanor.
So I'm also a relative newcomer to this field, because I spent 12 years in industry before coming to the PhD. Sort of about 2/3 of the way through that time was when I learnt about PSMs, and I realised that really I was doing problem structuring without using any PSM tools. So when I came across the tools, I thought, oh, this is great. I've got a new toolkit. I've got some new things to try. I have to admit, I've not yet tried VSM, but I did try Soda journey making. I tried SSM. I enjoyed this. And I joined the OR Society. And Mike probably knows what I'm going to say. One of the reasons that I decided I would like to do a PhD was slightly emancipatory, because sometimes even coming into the OR Society with an interest in soft OR, I found that sometimes when I talked about my work, I wasn't using the right language, or wasn't using the right terminology. Occasionally there were people who were just telling me I was doing it all wrong. So part of the motivation for my PhD, looking at what everyday people are doing to structure problems in their everyday work, was that I wanted these people to have a bit of a voice, because I absolutely agree with Angela that it's not only that we should be working together across OR, whether that's hard or soft, and cycling between them, as Colin was mentioning. That definitely used to happen when I was practicing as an internal practitioner. But I think also back out to working with the people who we're trying to help, trying to assist. So I think that's something that's very important to me. Because absolutely, I remember Colin, about 6 years ago at a conference, asked me, well, how do you get involved in problem situations as an internal practitioner? And I would absolutely agree with his earlier comment that sometimes you use a PSM, you get sort of 2/3 of the way through, you think, oh, this is going quite well, and suddenly the people you're working with say, okay, that's enough, I don't need you anymore, I know what I'm going to do. And you maybe take 5-10 minutes to really explore this, to be sure that everybody is definitely on the same page here, and that really you have done enough as a soft OR assistance to some of these people that they're then absolutely happy. They've structured the problem, they've understood, and they've got a commitment to action that they can collectively go away and work without you. And then maybe 3-4 months later they come back with you with a slightly different problem. But for me then it's very cyclical. So you haven't got this divide between hard and soft, and you do have this sort of back and forth of people coming back with a slightly different problem. You've probably kept engaged just enough so you know what they're doing with their optimization or their process mapping or whatever it is they've decided to do, and then they come back when they need a little bit more support. I think. Did you
Colin. Thank you.
I was just reflecting on the arguments that used to happen between Peter Checkland, myself, and John Friend about whether these so-called software techniques, SODA, SSM, strategic choice, was OR or wasn't it OR? Peter very clearly saying, no, SSM is not OR. Mm-hmm. And very clear about it on the basis that there were no formal analysis that you could make of the models that he constructed. John, on the other hand, saying, no, but what we've got with strategic choice is a formal, designed way of working with a group. That's what makes it OR. And then Peter saying, on the other hand, but John, you don't have any theoretical guidance to what you've done. He would say, Colin, you've got all this cognitive psychology stuff, that's okay. I've got all this system stuff. Where's your theory in what guides you, John? And this would go on for year after year after year. And it was sort of pointless, really. And, you know, Peter has had an enormous impact on the OR community in the work that he's done.
Huge.
Strategic choice has been very popular and very well used. These are the sorts of things that we should be interested in. Why are they used?
Yes.
Why do they work with people? And as Eleanor says, it's sort of they work with people often because you get a group of people who feel just very pleased to have been involved because they now feel they've made a much more intelligent and thoughtful decision than they would have otherwise done. But quite often, in the work that we do, quite often they also reach that conclusion and say, but on the other hand, we would like a little bit more verification, a little bit more validation of our judgments. How about you go away and actually do, sometimes it's something as simple as a bit of spreadsheet analysis that actually you bring back, and it informs them and makes them feel more confident to reach this position. I've always thought the biggest problem in actually a lot of the work we do is getting that measure where a group begins to feel increasingly more confident in the decision they're making. And if you're not careful, you take them over the top of that and push them towards more detailed analysis that they're just not interested in. And then you actually lose ownership and commitment to the original judgment they made. And I think as a community, we're often we do so much want to take them down the route of more and more detailed work that we lose them in the process, and that's difficult. On the other hand, you know, the amount of work that I've done where I've gone into DES or SD modelling, sometimes, as I say, often just simple spreadsheet analysis, because it's proven to be incredibly helpful. And in fact, what's often been the case is that actually as you build a simulation model in particular, the issues of parameter estimation, you have to go back to the client to give you help with. And that's when they suddenly, I mean, the work we did with the police force was fascinating, where they had judgments about the productivity of an inspector compared with the productivity of a sergeant. And then they started working on the parameter estimation problem and finished up changing the whole of their annual performance review routines as a consequence of that. Now, that's a good outcome as far as I'm concerned, but it actually came from the issues of the interaction between, if you like, their soft OR modelling, this causal mapping that they'd done, and then their need to actually go down the simulation route. We never finished the simulation modelling because they reached the point of more confidence, and that's the issue I think you're getting at, is the level at which you get confidence in an intelligent and thoughtful decision. And that's what we've got to monitor as a profession, and take the group, the client, as far as they need to go in order for them to feel satisfied that they've made a more intelligent and thoughtful decision than they could have otherwise done. Then we've done our job.
And that, to me, seems to be a perfect description of what OR should be. That's what, I think Angela wanted to go first.
Yeah, I think she did, yes.
Yes.
Okay. No, I was completely in agreement with Colin and with you, Eleanor. I think that from a VSM perspective, one of the things that I understood is if you think about managing complexity, managing variety, when you come as an analyst, as an engineer, for instance, to do a computer software design, yeah, the amount of time that it takes you to understand an organization that you are just jumping in is enormous. I mean, in terms of a systems analyst has no requisite variety to absorb all the complexity of an organization. This is natural. So the way to do it, the best way to do it, is to have the users who have requisite variety about their own organizational practices and processes and everything, and to facilitate their learning so that they are the ones who are going to do at least the first part of the modeling. Yeah, as you say, you have to take as much as them so that they are the protagonists of the mapping, the analysis, and then if you have to go deeper, you can work on expert mode to go a little bit deeper into the tools. But I think that this aspect is also fundamental in terms of understanding that users, people who know the day-to-day organization, need to be as involved as possible in whatever we do. I mean, being strategic assumption, being critical systems, being systems dynamic, being BSM, that aspect is what makes the understanding of the users very important, and the participation and the involvement very, very important for the success of a project.
Thank you. David?
Well, all I was going to say was I think back to Blackett, the foundations of OR. What we're all here for, surely, is to just get something done, aren't we? Now, maybe it was easier to just focus on that when the fascists have taken over Germany and they're headed our way. And what are we going to do about this? But it's still worth remembering as a model. It's about making things better, improving things with whatever seems to be the necessary approach. I mean, I wasn't trained as an operational researcher. I'm a mathematician, or I was, and my doctorate was in mathematical biology. And the job there was to sit down with biologists and convince them that some of this clever math stuff could tell them something interesting and useful. That was quite a hard sell, and I now see that was quite a good preparation to be an operational researcher. To be an operational researcher in the model that I think we all are in this room. But what I was going to say, and this can't be the last comment because it's too dark, yeah, the broad church thing sounds fine, and that's what everybody in this room wants. And I think one of the things we can do, and I always do it, and it's genuine, but it's also tactical, is I try to be very supportive of my hard OR colleagues. I get, that's interesting, that's work worth doing. And what I find in the UK is that the hard OR colleagues are much more accepting of the broad church. But we have to be aware that there are elements in academia who despise this stuff and have actually actively worked to destroy it. At some institutions. So it's we can go broad church, let's all be friendly together. Not everyone thinks that, right? And we need to be aware of that.
So I can carry on with some of that point. So in the recent, was it the Palgrave Handbook of Operational Research that was published, I think, last year? In the preface, actually, there's a wonderful quote. At a more fundamental level, should soft OR be in scope or out of scope? The fact that question was even voiced and printed in the preface of a handbook of OR suggests that there is a problem. So, yes, there is an issue in academic publishing. We know about the American journals being hostile to soft OR outputs. So even if you like, reflective accounts of problem structuring activity, or even wanting to spend some more time to investigate how that process works and how it can be made more effective, without regard to any specific methodology, might be a reasonable line of inquiry for operational research as a whole. But in terms of writing about that, publishing that, then there are few venues that are going to be accepting. When I actually took on the role of editor-in-chief of EJOR, there are no associate editors, so the 6 editors-in-chief in effect manage the whole kind of journal. The appointments go through Euro, which is the European Association of OR Societies, and have to be rubber-stamped by them, as well as the publisher. I made it abundantly clear that I was going to continue in the same vein as Robert in terms of making sure that the journal remained friendly to anything in this space, anything that was integrational, anything that was around specific methodologies. But David is right. There are, sort of elements within our wider OR community that are potentially hostile to what it is that we do. And the point from the philosopher at the back, I don't know your name, I'm sorry. More or less the last thing I did at the University of Exeter before I took early retirement was to run a module on advanced interdisciplinary research design for the Southwest Doctoral Training Programme, which is a consortium of 4 universities in the Southwest. So all of the PhD students come through that, and was delightfully introduced to Abbott's work on the chaos of disciplines. And these dichotomies abound in the social sciences. So whenever it's possible to put up an analytic divide, hard, soft, applied, pure, radical, not radical, critical, not critical, and so on, then a community will neatly divide into the 2 camps. And we will find that we also have people that have come into our camp, or we find that we're in a camp where other people have come from a different journey. And one of the things that I've been quite interested in recently is the fact that what we do in using problem structuring methods and soft operational research is a form of applied social science. And there are an awful lot of people who do sort of interventionist work who have come from academic traditions that are nothing like ours. Yet when you look at their interventions, their work and so on, you can say, well, we're doing the same thing. We are doing exactly the same thing. Interestingly, if you have a look at the applications of the known problem structuring methods, so let's stick to causal loop diagramming, qualitative system dynamics, strategic choice approach, so the SSM and so on, more than 70% of what's published is not in OR journals. It's outside. A lot of it is in engineering, interestingly enough, but vast swathes of it are in the social sciences. So if you like, there's another constituency of people who are doing what we're doing, who are not in this room, not in this conference, but are in other conferences, but we would have a lot to say to them and a lot of commonality, because we would be on the same wavelength and we'd be thinking about problems in exactly the same way, and how to go about designing interventions to address them. So if you like, our subject is enormously interesting, both because of the communication that we need to have with the rest of our profession in operational research, but also with an awful lot of other people. And I think that's something that we could be doing as well, reaching out to those communities and making the links and the bridges. I'm aware that we're just slightly over time. I'd like to thank the panel here for a brilliant contribution to this morning's session, and thank you too for your questions and contributions.